Hello, everyone. Michael Jordan fans are the best. And today we're going to be doing a debate of Steph Curry versus Wilt Chamberlain. But first, before we get into that, let's welcome our debaters. First, we have T Perfect here. How are you today?
Doing great. How are you?
And we have Nick, NMB Sports. How are you today, sir?
Doing good. Happy weekend, everybody.
Absolutely. And for the people that don't know, this will be 3-minute rounds. Nick has elected to go first in the first round of the MJFB Summer Debate League. Um, are you gentlemen ready? You're
Ready.
not first. There you go. All right. With that being said, let's get it on. There'll be a 10-second primer, and let's do it.
Three, two, one.
All right, everybody. Thanks for having me. I would actually like to start this by taking a step back and really focusing in on Curry. I'm gonna kind of go after Curry here in my debate. That's my angle here. I think Wilt's statistical and analytical dominance kind of speaks for itself. I don't really need to go into that. His accolades, all NBAs, whether first team or defensive, which he would have more than two selections had they been around earlier. His MVPs, his times leading the league in any category, which is 18 times, not counting what he maybe would have had for blocks, and even an assist championship in there as well. All of these are greater than Curry in a shorter amount of time. Minus the two more rings that Curry has over Wilt, there really is not much that you can point to that Curry is better than Wilton in terms of a career. Obviously, the three-point shooting, but outside of the rings and the three-point shooting, it's slim pickings for Curry in terms of what you could argue against Wilt. And if that wasn't good enough in terms of my opening 20 seconds why Wilt is better, I think we need to take a step back and ask ourselves what constitutes a top 10 player. We are literally talking about the greatest players of all time to ever play this game. And I think it needs a little bit of a revision and a deeper look. I'm reminded of what Bob Costas said at Larry Bird's retirement. Throughout the history of the NBA, there have been players who were great at one aspect of the game: deadly shooters, outstanding ball hawks, or shot blockers, and so forth. There have been some, although far fewer in number, who are outstanding multi-dimensional players. But Larry Bird is one of only a handful of NBA stars who excelled in every facet of the game. In my opinion, that is the bar, or that's what we should be keeping in mind when we think about the top 10 players of all time. Did they excel at more than one or two things? What did they contribute? What could they do? What was their in-game impact? And when I made my list, this quote came to my mind a lot. When we get up to this rarefied air that is the top 10, it is the smallest of margins that ultimately separates one player from another in every individual's mind and however they'll make that choice. But ultimately, when we make the cut, what we are looking for in terms of deciding factors, what are they in terms of what puts one player over another? In my opinion, in this specific scenario of ranking the top 10, Curry falls into that first category. He is a great player at one thing. He is a great shooter. When we look at that compared to all the other things that Wilt did, blocking shots, defense, there are two ends of the game here. And Curry essentially is absent on one end compared to Wilt, who's be considered one of the greatest shot blockers and rim protectors ever. When we look at that, in my opinion, Curry just does not do enough other things to be
Three,
considered a top 10
two,
player in this
one.
rarefied air and comparing him to other greats like Wilt.
So again, for my opening statement, and again, I agree with a lot of what Nick said there. Again, I'm not here to actually bash Wilt Chamberlain or any other player that I'm going to compare him with. Obviously, when we're talking about top 10 players, there's generally speaking, there's razor slim margins that divide them. Whether you're talking about total resumes, um, impacts they had on our team, measurable impacts, various forms of statistical dominance depending on positions, things like that. And if you have a unbiased criteria and and you use that to, like, or to make your top 5 or 10 and whatever the case is, then in that case, you, like I said, it's rare that you see players that are head and shoulders above others in your ranking. Now, what I'm going to talk about today is basically the impact that both players did or did not have on our teams relative to each other. Why I think that Wilt Chamberlain specifically is, especially when you're talking about statistically and analytically, is not really as impactful as the sheer numbers make it seem, especially without context, and why Steph Curry is, and especially where his influence on the game as a whole, especially to where we see it today. And why I don't think that Will Chamberlain actually had that much of a, or I should say, as measurable of an impact. And I want to do that in terms of talking about their scoring prowess. Again, what type of competition they had, especially in those departments, what they were going with, and just really the context of their stats as a whole. As far as what we're going to compare, because obviously there's a lot of myth surrounding Will Chamberlain. There's a lot of, just face value takings of his stats, narratives, things like that. Obviously, Will Chamberlain, amazing player, certified top 10 on anyone's list if it's legit. And there's not a whole lot of bad you can say about him. But again, I'm just hoping that the context will actually provide a little bit of a clarity when you're talking about when we're trying to measure him against the other greats. And obviously, it's a little bit difficult because we're talking about different eras, wildly different play styles, different positions, things like that. But as we get into it, I hope that we'll see that one man clearly had not only a better impact on his team as a whole, but on the league in general as far as the evolution, and as far as like the finished product that we're seeing today. Okay, and so that's what we're going to go into, and then obviously I'll try and respond to whatever my opponent says here.
3, 2, 1.
Yeah, so one thing I'll actually concede is I do think Curry's had a greater impact on the game, right? And it's kind of almost to a fault, though, right? I as 6-foot Joe Schmo can't go do what Wilt Chamberlain does, right? But I can put up 10 threes from behind the arc in a pickup game, right? So I do think Curry has changed the game in terms of the average player, how they copy him, what he's done. I will give you that. And if we're gonna take that into account with maybe the Warriors dynasty, right? If you want to take those two things in terms of a legacy, we can maybe slip Steph Curry into the top 10 there, right? But for me, right, my argument is, when I was doing this top 10 list, the awards and the accolades, they begin to have a bit of a diminishing return effect. And what I mean by that is everyone's got a stacked trophy case. Everyone's got tons of great games you can look at. Everyone's got all the awards and accolades. Everyone's got the records, although Wilt technically is the actual record book. But when I was making my list here, I kept coming back to skill set and how did you win, right? And I'll get into the how did you win later. But skill set kept coming up to me, right? Because again, everyone's got multiple championships. Everyone's got multiple MVPs, all NBAs, awards and records, etc. What was your skill set, right? And I kind of come back to that Bob Costas quote about Larry Bird, right? Steph Curry is only twice, for being the greatest three-point shooter of all time, he's only twice led the league in any category, twice led the league in points per game. He's got some times where he also led the league in free throw percentage, but I'll put that to the side, right? In terms of just absolute dominance, again, Wilt Chamberlain 18 times led the league in any category. That doesn't even include blocks. Maybe he gets a steals title in there or something like that as well. But in my opinion, right, I'm going to go back to the skill set. Curry, what Curry does outside of three-point shooting, especially in terms of compared to the top 10 greatest ever, in my opinion, is just lacking. Is he a great passer? Well, they say MJ couldn't pass, and Steph Curry's only got one more assist per game, right? He's not a shot blocker. He's not going to put the clamps on anyone. He's not a good rebounder. He quite literally operates on this gravitas of the three-point shot, which he is the greatest three-point shooter of all time. No doubt, hands down, you'll get no argument from me. But again, we've seen him even in times against someone like Kyrie Irving, right? He has struggled as well, too, if you can get someone on him who's just dedicated to him, correct? it helps having someone like a Klay Thompson and Draymond Green and Wiggins and all these other guys that have helped him as well. Same for Wilt. But again, to me, in terms of the all-time top 10 greats, Curry's a little one-dimensional.
Yeah, and again, like I said, it's a lot of this is stuff that obviously you as fans are well aware of. Both players, like Nick said, are great, and after a while, yeah, that's 100% true. Like you see the trophy case, and a lot of it looks the same. You're like picking, you're like threading needles, and uh, you're splitting hairs when you're talking about, who has the most accolades, achievements, and the devil's in the details. It really is. And at the end of the day, you're gonna have your opinion on, who's your favorite player and whatnot. But let's get into some of the facts here. So I'll start with, what we were talking about a little bit earlier, and adding some context. So Wilt, amazing scorer. I obviously have him as a top 10 scorer of all time, because he's one of only 10 players to have led their team in points per game at least 10 separate seasons, and done so at an overall 50% clip or better. Okay, so he's one of them. That being said, uh, his numbers, especially compared to any other center in history, I get the errors are different and things like that, but Wilt was really just a volume machine. His first 3 years in the league, again, he averaged a monstrous 34 shots per game on just over 48% shooting. Now, including the 40 shots per game in 1962, just over 50%. Now, this is easily, again, the most stretch of, take your pick, the most shots per game in any season ever with 39.5. The most shots taken over or per game over that span, 34. Now, anyone else there, again, any other volume score in history, you give them that, they're going to have similar points per game production, especially when you're giving them 40 shots a game. And also, he took the most free throw attempts in NBA history that season on a per game basis was 17 in 1962. So again, again, obviously he was a poor free throw shooter as well, but that's still 8 or 9 extra points that's being given, again, that no other player has even sniffed really. Now, to give a little bit more of a context there, the other centers that even played meaningful, or even I should say prime years in the 60s that were his competition were Walt Bellamy, Bob Rule, Willis Reed, Nate Thurman, and Zelmo Beatty. Now, during that time, these guys, again, they only took about 19 shots per game and they averaged 48% shooting. So his competition was, to say the least, like not that significant as far as, people he had to outproduce or outscore. Again, but now obviously he had competition, as far as having to beat these guys and the impact they had, like Bill Russell, things like that. But those are the only real players who were even approaching 20 or more points per game. Now, we're also
3, 2, 1.
Yeah, and actually one of the aspects I wanted to kind of bring up again, we talk about different ways you affect the game. Whenever I hear 10 plus free throw attempts, I hear 5 fouls at least on the other team, right? Again, this is just a kind of different style, right? That'd be kind of like me saying, well, in Curry's era, guys didn't really ever play defense and you couldn't touch Curry, so he got open looks all the time or things of that nature, right? It kind of just is what it is, right? He still shot over a 50% clip. He shot 54% for his career, right? It just if it'd be one thing if he was shooting like 45% or less or something, but he's shooting a high clip. I really don't have a problem with the volume. I would feed a center 100 times a game if he shot 55% and got me tons of fouls on the other team. Yes, free throw percentage could be a little better. That is definitely a weakness, right? But outside of free throws, there's just no holes in Wilt's game, right? And as much as we want to talk about his scoring, right, his rebounding and his defense was essentially second to none. And one of the other things, so the awards and accolades would kind of address a bit of a diminishing returns effect there. We look at skill sets. I think Wilt, just going down the line of categories and analytics and different ways someone could impact a game through defense or rebounding, rim protection. Again, his assists picked up later in his career, right? So he could definitely evolve and do other things. But outside of the skill set and the awards, one thing I also looked at was how did you win, right? And what brought me to this was how do I address Curry's 2 more rings, right? And yes, you might say that in your opinion, Wilt's competition maybe wasn't as great. Although I don't really see who today would stop Wilt either per se, right? There might be one or two guys, but you look at his losses, right? Essentially, Wilt's career is this. He goes up early in his career, and all of his losses are essentially to Boston in the series somehow. He runs up against the greatest dynasty that has ever existed in the NBA. And how did he play against his one actual superior counterpart in terms of Bill Russell? He statistically dominated him across the board. Didn't get the dubs, didn't get the wins. I understand that. But again, we're talking about playing what is arguably the greatest team of all time in that Celtics dynasty run that they had back in the day. It's kind of hard to be mad at Wilt for that. He did his part. He still got 2 rings out of it. And then, of course, he one time would lose to a guy named Kareem and the Big O. Those guys are kind of good too. And then he lost a couple times to the New York Knicks after they had put together an absolutely devastating lineup, right? With Frazier and Monroe and all of those guys, right? So again, I look at how Wilt lost, and there's really not a whole lot of shame there, right? There's not a whole lot that I'm.
So yeah, what I was gonna kind of mention also is like just I won't harp on it too much because I definitely agree. Like I already said, that Wilt Chamberlain was a fantastic scorer. He was above average efficiency, especially for his day. Relative to, like I mentioned before, the other centers. But just a little bit of context. The next closest guy on that list, as far as shots taken in the 60s when I was Elgin Baylor, was 17,000. Now, Wilt took almost 3,000, or actually over 3,000 more shots than did. And again, that was, averaging almost 6 minutes more per game as well. So Wilt Chamberlain was a volume scorer, absolutely. Not really taking anything away from him, but just a little bit of context like that. When you're talk about, I don't think there's any argument for him being the best scorer of all time, especially when you consider in the way he did it. Especially if you look at some of the efficiency that happened later and the free throw percentage, things like that. But, what I want to do also is just kind of mention that the impact. So when he joined Warriors here, and you're looking at overall impact, obviously, these things aren't really the end-all be-all of anything like that. I don't really use advanced metrics to really say this is definitively what measures a player, makes them good. It's a piece of puzzle. But if you look at when he first joined the Philadelphia Warriors in 1960, then there was only 1 year in the next. Now, when I say that he was basically using his volume just before he toned it down to be more of a team-oriented guy, there was really only 1 year in 1962 where they actually led the league in scoring, and that was only out of 8 teams. And that was in 1962. The rest of that time, their points per game were either mid to bottom 5 or bottom tier of the league. That goes for the defense as well. He really never helmed a defensive elite team, and that also goes for when he actually joined that team. They went from first in points per game, and then they started getting progressively worse each and every season, and they were generally 7th. Now, obviously, a lot of that depends on personnel, things like that, but there was really no indication that he had a market impact on either side of the floor as far as translating that to team success. Obviously, I'm not going to hold Nick's right. I'm not going to hold it against him that he didn't win more rings because he was going up against, like he said, a lot of the juggernauts, arguably the best dynasty in history. But if you're looking from a game-to-game basis, again, it just doesn't seem like his style of play was conducive to winning. Steph Curry, on the other hand, again, helmed 3 top scoring teams of all time as far as points per game, leading their team. Again, he's the only player in NBA history to average 30 or more points per game while also doing a 50-40-90 season. Okay, we'll get into that more.
Yeah, absolutely. Curry is obviously the more accurate shooter, the better shooter. And the 50-40-90 obviously being a 3-point shooter that he, Wilt probably would have been 50-40-90 had they had the 3-point line back then, but I'm just kidding. But the other thing I wanted to focus on, so I talked about kind of Wilt's shortcomings, if you want to put it that, in terms of the ring debate versus Curry, right? Unfortunately, I think a little bit of circumstance there. He ran into some other all-time greats. And again, I also don't want this to come off like I'm tearing down Curry, because I'm not. Like I said, I think if we take his impact and what he's done with the dichotomy of the 3-point line for today's kids and today's game, and you want to slip the Warriors dynasty in with that. Legacy-wise, I think Curry has an argument to be top 10, right? But remember, this is top 10 players. You have to put a physical specimen on the court that you think can do the most to help your team win. And that is ultimately my argument, right? Two ends of the floor, even scoring, right? For their career, Curry only took about 4 or 5 less shots per game than Wilt. I know Wilt, had highs and lows there, but again, that being considered, Wilt scored more points. He shot a higher field goal percentage. Again, Curry has a higher true shooting and effective field goal percentage. It's a little more weighted to 3-point shots, and obviously Wilt didn't have a very good free throw percentage, right? But in terms of just a field goal percentage, Wilt was the better scorer, I think. So even in the one thing that Curry you could maybe argue is better at than Wilt, statistically, right, over a season long or something of that nature, giving the guy the ball 25, 30 times and him shooting over 55% from 2 feet out from the basket, right? I just think over a long enough time span there, that's a greater strategy than shooting threes. I wanted to real quick talk about Curry's rings, right? In Curry's first ring, Kyrie Irving gets hurt in game 1. He doesn't come back, and the Warriors go on to win, right? In the next time they reach the finals, in my opinion, I've made this argument the whole time. Kyrie Irving outplays Steph Curry. He shuts him down for enough games where he doesn't essentially get above 15 points. And in my opinion, that ultimately is what spurs on the win for the Cavaliers over the Warriors, right? Including hitting the 3 over Curry to win the game, as Kyrie Irving did. But then after that, Curry picks up Durant, right? I think that's not Curry's fault. That has nothing to do with Curry, but it is what it is, right? Durant wins 2 finals MVPs, and Andre Iguodala wins a finals MVP too, right? For all the times that Curry won, him and Wilt have the same finals MVPs trophies in their trophy case, right? So, the 4th against Boston, I don't really have any complaints, but even the way Curry won is maybe a little questionable.
So just kind of get back to what I was saying there. As far as like their impact on their team success, like there's really no indication, especially if you look at offensive and defensive rating, where their team and their team's win-loss record, that Wilt had anything or a measurable major impact on his team's winning or their success on either end of the court. Other than possibly 1 year when, again, he was obviously averaging 50 points a game, but that wasn't really conducive either. Now, what happened is that when you're looking at that, it's just kind of an indication to me that while he was great and he was amazing at getting his teammates were kind of phased out. They were just playing a lot of standalone ball, stand around and watch things like that. And if you're gonna get your stats, I mean that's one way to do it. But I'm not really gonna take anything away from him. What happened happened. But if you're looking at Steph Curry, again, if you look at a chart here, when he really started to jack up his 3-point production and scoring in general and his efficiency, like Nick said, he's, again, ranks very highly in true shooting and effective field goal percentage, especially true shooting, where he's really the only non-forward or center in the top 10. Again, he's number 6 all time. And that's incredible for someone who, like I said, is not a big man. Like you see, it's dominated by big men who, especially people like DeAndre Jordan, who are just arguably fringe role players. Now, you see the 3-point percentage or 3-point attempts in the league actually start to skyrocket. Same time Curry does between 2013 and 14, where you start to see a dissension between 18, and then it gradually goes up to where it is now at around 35 a game. Again, he's almost directly responsible for that, as well as Klay Thompson, who was his running mate. But Curry's again efficiency and his ability to weaponize a certain part of the game, and he wasn't just a guy who was shooting great percentage and taking only a couple of threes per game like Steve Kerr. Nothing taken away from him either, but he's a guy who's weaponizing the 3 ball, weaponizing the most efficient shot in history, and doing it to a point where it impacts you if you don't stop it or if you don't model your entire team and strategy in a similar way. You have no shot at competing. That's why we saw the pace of play dramatically increase from about that time he started doing that, when it was the slowest ever from 90 all the way to 2010. Started to creep up when he saw this different style of play, when he saw him being the most efficient in history at it, especially in terms of volume and efficiency. Like You start seeing every single team model their exact play style, their drafting culture, what they were looking for on tape, scouting reports, things like that. All that was affected by what this man was doing. That's just facts. Will Chamberlain never had close to that
3,
effect on
2,
any part of the game.
1.
Yeah, so again, I want to emphasize my distinction here and my angle of the argument in this last round here, right? Legacy and impact in terms of just the game of basketball, I think Curry has more of an argument than Wilt, right? Your average kid cannot be a 7'2" track star who plays basketball, right? People just can't identifying that. It's mesmerizing to watch. It's incredible the athletic and physical specimen that Wilt was, which I think is another reason why he should be in the top 10 or at least over Curry. Uh, but again, if we talk about like the dynasty of the Warriors and the way Curry has kind of evolved the game as a legacy, I can understand that argument. But again, we're talking about a top 10 list. Basketball players playing the game of basketball, right? And so I have to go back to that Bob Costas quote to wrap this up. There have been several players throughout the NBA history who have been great at one thing or one particular facet of the game. And unfortunately for me, right, Curry fits in that first box. He is great at one thing. The greatest to ever do that one thing, and his impact on doing that one thing is monumental, right? But if we're going to compare a player to player, and we kind of drop the teams around them and maybe a lot of the context, and you just kind of look at these players, right? A 7'2", 7'3" guy who ran track at Kansas, played 45 minutes a game, was relentless, was dominant two-way player. His accolades and his awards are still greater than Curry, minus the rings. Uh, if we look at somebody like that, right, compared to a Curry, for me, it is just hard to say that if we put them in a vacuum or we put them randomly here or there, that over the long haul or over a long enough timeline, Wilt's game is going to have a much greater impact in terms of production and wins and teams having to adjust or take account of that, right? Again, we're talking about a whole two sides of the game here, and Curry is almost non-existent on one half of an entire side of this game, right? And for me, that is ultimately why I had to leave Curry out of my top 10. I see this as basketball players, skill sets, who can adapt and do more than other people, who can contribute. If I'm a coach, right, my mouth is watering at thinking about putting Wilt Chamberlain on the floor, right? The things I can do with a guy like that who plays 45 minutes a game is going to guard the rim and get me, 30 plus points a game, right? Versus Curry, who I understand he on the offensive end what he is, but after that, I've got to come up with other ways to get my guys in right spots or to produce or do the right decision. In terms of just looking at
3,
players, I
2,
don't think it's close how
1.
much greater of a basketball player Wilt was compared to Curry.
So it's like I'm seeing here in the chat, and I agree uh, with people like Rex and Shade. It's just like it's such a hard comparison because the dichotomy is very similar. They're two polar opposite players playing literally the exact opposite positions, and their styles aren't even remotely the same. So it's
Very
super
true.
hard to give them to compare them in a vacuum and just do straight up heads up because their stats are going to look different in various ways. And Nick's absolutely right. It's just like there's no way you're going to be like, okay, how is Steph measured up to him defensively? I think Steph is an average to slightly above average guard. Again, he's led the league in steals times there, but he was, yeah, I mean, in 2016, where he had arguably maybe the best season of all time, the only unanimous MVP in league history. And obviously his overall stats and accolades aren't as great as Wilt, but I think that when you are the undeniably the best at something, in this case, shooting with volume, shooting with consistency as far as the 3-point percentage goes, then you're automatically a top 10 player. And you can arguably be one of the greatest players ever, especially if you have the hardware to back it up. He has the finals MVPs, he has the rings, he has the all NBA selections, all stars, whatever you want to do. Again, he has all the boxes checked. To a lesser degree than some of the other greats, absolutely. I'm not saying he's the GOAT or anything. But when you talk about players who have had a measurable impact, and you can see that in the game, And it's like Dart always said, who's greater? Who's not, not who's better. I'm not going to ask Curry to guard Wilt Chamberlain or anything like that or check him. And again, I'm not going to say that he was a better defensive player, but he was by far the more impactful player. When you talk about who contributed more wins, who was better, who contributed to their team's offense in a more measurable way, Curry, and it's not even close. Again, Wilt Chamberlain, again, wasn't even that great. If you're talking about again, measurable impact on our team. Did he have the great statistical numbers, especially on defense? Of course. But again, there's a lot of context that goes into it, and it did not contribute to his team winning. Again, we really only saw Wilt have maybe sustained success, especially if you're talking about efficiency relative to, again, everyone else. When he cut his shot attempts in half and bought into the system that the Lakers were going to throw in him. But if we're talking about who was the better player as far as, again, pushing the game along, measurable team impact and success, and what we're seeing now, much more impactful player, that I don't see how you can say it's not Stephen Curry when we're talking about a direct comparison to Wilt Chamberlain. Again, that's just my opinion. I think the facts kind of bear that out when you objectively look at, again, the team success, again, what the correlation
3,
of the style of
2,
play
1.
to where we are now.
All right, all right. That wraps the debate up. I want y'all in the comments. I'm going to be dropping a link in the community post soon about who you think won the debate between Travis T. Perfect favoring Steph Curry and then Nick NMB Sports favoring Wilt Chamberlain. But y'all have or the live chat. You guys get a treat because these two wanted to continue this in an open debate for some time. I'm going to let them continue it, and then I'm going to drop the link after some time if anyone wants to call in.
Oh, yeah. Well, I was just saying that I really only had a couple of rounds kind of written out, and that after that, I was kind of just reacting to what
Same.
he said. But you did say something at the end I wanted to address, and I forgot to, and that is you had mentioned how like the Lakers wanted Wilt to change his game a little bit, right? And the team got better because of that. I think that's an argument pro Wilt, right? If you were to ask Curry, hey, man, your shot's not falling, or we want to get this other guy going, or just something that would make Curry shoot a little less, I don't think Curry impacts the game at all. He's essentially done, right? And again, I'm not saying you would ever ask Curry to do that. I'm just saying, again, this kind of goes to my argument. If you were to tell Curry, like, hey, we really, for this game, we need you to put the clamps on this guy, or we really, for this game, need you to be nothing but a facilitator, I don't think Curry's able to do other things to contribute as well as Wilt.
Yeah, I mean, you might be correct, man, because it's tough because I think that Wilt was, especially if you look at the team he went on with, Jerry West and all those guys. I mean, and obviously that was one of the greatest teams ever that we've, especially when they went on their run. You've got a guy who's can be a defensive anchor and still give you a very efficient, 15, 20, 25 points a game. Then he learned how to do that, and that's a testament to him. Absolutely. I mean, I want to kind of liken it to what Shaq did in 06 a little bit with Miami. Not that I don't think he could have been prime Shaq anymore, but he still was like, I need to take a backseat to Wade and that. But that's a, testament to, Wilt that's one of the reasons why I consider him a top 10 player of all time. I don't think that it's kind of a fair comparison though to say that, what would you ask Curry to do? Because we know that you wouldn't say, hey, can you not be the greatest shooter of all time?
Yeah, you would
Like,
never ask him to do that. I agree.
It would just be like, some players, I agree, are limited in what they could do. But that thing that they do is like what you got to milk until they can't do it anymore, right? And Curry's been doing that a lot, kind of a GOAT level for at least 11 straight years. Like, he kind of won another title in 22. So, I mean, it's, to me, like, I don't have him as my GOAT. He's fringe top 10 for me, but I just think that if you're talking about some of the more impactful players, especially from, statistically and moving the game along, Curry, it's hard for me to put anyone above that, at least like multiple spots.
Yeah, I would say Curry has evolved the game more than Wilt for sure. Like, again, it's kind of back to the, like, I once heard someone say, like, Shaq changed the game. Shaq didn't change the game. Like, Shaq was just the biggest guy in the room, right? I don't really see how he changed the game, right? Curry changed the game. Like, he completely changed the dynamic of the three-point shot and where people are getting shots up from. and how an offense operates and spreading the floor and all that kind of stuff, right? And again, like I kind of said, your average 6-foot Joe Schmo or kid at the park can't. I'm going to be Wilt Chamberlain. I'm going to replicate Wilt Chamberlain. Like you can't. Same with Shaq. Like I'm going to be Shaq. Like you just can't do that. The average guy or player or even guy in the NBA just can't do that. But every guy can get a shot from the 3-point line, you know? So he definitely, in that regard, I think Curry has impacted and changed the game more than Wilt. There's really not a big argument for me on that. I was more arguing from just you have to kind of, if you're doing a draft board, right? I would like Wilt's skill set and abilities and what he does. Think about a 7'3" guy running the floor for 45 minutes, right? Like that's just unheard of now, right? So I just think that's where Wilt kind of takes over.
Yeah, and Wilt had, I mean, it's amazing how much talent he had left over from, betting 10,000 women, right? Like,
yeah,
crazy.
He said he could have been the greatest volleyball player of all time, too, had he wanted.
He was definitely the best volume scorer, like, on and off the court, right?
Yeah.
Maybe 20,000.
You're right. I think, you're right. Like, any player can, like, jack up threes, but it's like, how many players are going to shoot 43% on 10-plus attempts?
Oh, yeah.
And doing it, it's just like,
saying that.
That's not where I think he's the enigma. And we never really ever saw it, but I don't think anyone ever thought that they could. And that's why it was so scary when he started to material. But yeah, you're right. Like Wilt would exceed, I think, in any era because he was athletic, fast. He was like Bill Russell in that regard. And he had, contrary to popular belief, I don't think a lot of people realize that he had like a decent jumper. He could, decent post game too. He wasn't just all dunks and layups.
He had a little bit of a fall away bank shot. Not a lot of people know that. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. And like people, I think like the best centers are, and like you said, not every guy's going to be like an athletic, nimble footed or, fleet footed, 7'1" guy like, Hakeem, Shaq, Kareem, things like that. Those are outliers. Yeah. So, I mean, at the end of the day, it's tough because when you're talking about the top 10 players, it's like, what do you say? You can't really, there's not a ton of negatives. Otherwise they wouldn't be there.
Yeah, and I was curious what you thought when I said because not that I felt hypocritical, right? Like when you get into the top 10, like nothing's just gonna align perfectly with your logic, right? Something's gonna kind of zig when you zag a little bit in terms of how you think. But when I got to the top 10, I kind of noticed that like the accolades and the awards didn't matter as much as I thought they would, only because, like I said, everyone's got 3, 4, 5 rings. Everyone's got 2, 3, 4 MVPs, right? And there's almost like a diminishing return a little bit once you kind of reach a rarefied air and you've proven that you are, worthy of like being in this conversation. I find myself looking to like skill set, two-way dominance, like how did you win, right? Kind of, I've kind of joked that Dirk's 1 is greater than KD's 2 in a way, right? Like how did you win, and your skill set I found coming to the top a little more than just simply looking at, like in a just a random basketball conversation, people focus a lot on awards and accolades and stats. I think because it's a fact. Like it's something we can just look at and it is what it is. But when I was doing my top 10, I found myself looking more at skill sets and how did you win kind of becoming a deciding factor.
And real fast. That's why I had Bob Cousy over Larry Bird anyway.
Yeah. No, I agree because Curry's he's not my top 5. And I think my ranking system is similar to you where I value the two-way aspect more. That's why I have my top 5 personally is Mike, Kareem, LeBron, Hakeem, and Duncan. If you're talking about, I rank with peaks and primes on both ends. Like ring count doesn't really matter to me, although I think it's usually a byproduct of the greatness of these guys, and so are like general accolades and achievements. Those things will be there regardless. But when you're talking about who was the most impactful on both ends during their prime and peak, that's how I rank it, and I think we're similar to that. And I've always said it's tough for me going into this debate, especially because I said if all awards were equal and available since like 1950 onward, I said that Wilt Chamberlain and Bill Russell would be GOAT 1A and 1B, and you couldn't even have a debate about it. Like their awards and resumes would just be so monstrous. It would be like, okay, we'll set those guys aside and see who's coming in after that. So it would just be like, weird to talk about.
Yeah,
And,
yeah, I
and
agree
George
with
Mikan.
that.
And
There's a
George
lot
Mikan.
missing there.
Yeah.
Sorry, Dart. Go ahead.
No, I said and George Mikan.
yeah.
Sure. Yeah. Hey, it would be. Yeah. George Mikan.
Yeah, but
I
that
didn't
was
interrupt you.
a
My
great
bad.
debate, though. I thought as soon as I heard it, I thought this is going to be kind of this is a very polarizing one, right? You couldn't get any more opposite in terms of two all-time players.
Yeah, that's what I think makes the debates like more interesting. Like when you can't just say, "Well, my guy's a better passer and he's a center or a better rebounder." You have to like be more nuanced. And I
Yeah.
think you just certainly did a great job with that because you didn't try to be like, well, you didn't fall into that trap that a lot of other people do. Trying to compare disingenuous positional stats, things like that. You're talking about impact and things, and I was like, one thing I admire about you, Nick, is like you don't ever look like you're really reading from a script, and you never stutter. You never like kind of backtrack what you say, and like that's one thing I really try to work on, and I haven't gotten there yet. But I always enjoy watching you debate, regardless of what platform it is. So there's that.
Yeah. Like usually I'll write some notes that just spur what I was like thinking at the time, so it kind of helps me jog my memory. But yeah, and you argued exactly how I would have argued too. I would have put a total emphasis on Curry's impact and how he's changed the game and the Warriors dynasty and the winning and just Curry's argument is literally, I am so good at one thing that none of the other stuff matters, right? That's essentially, and that really is his career. Like that is what it is. So
yeah, totally.
Absolutely. I've dropped the link in the chat if anyone wants to call in and ask some questions or comment about the debate. And just to reemphasize the sentiment that these gentlemen had, I thought it was a great debate. Great points were made for both sides of the argument. And,
yeah, I enjoyed it.
But I'm going to drop the link and nobody calls in the next couple minutes. But yeah, I guess some of the questions I had, you guys already had answered more or less how you guys thought you did on the debate. But I guess you guys really didn't answer that for yourself. How do you think you did individually, Travis? Do you think it could have been better?
I think I did okay as far as like what there was to do. Like it's tough to like when you're splitting hairs about like a consensus top 5 player. It's tough, and like I think that really there's only one direction to go when you're trying to make a case for Curry, and that's what I did, and like as far as his impact and like what he did with the 3 ball. Other than that, it's tough when you're comparing him to a center who was transcendent. But I'd like to think I did okay, but we'll see.
Nick, how do you think you did?
I think I did good. I think the Bob Costas quote was just perfectly encapsulated what I was trying to do when I was making my top 10 list. But I think I did good. I didn't. It's kind of hard in these debates because it always goes faster than you think, and I had started to kind of do some research. I really wanted to get into the nuance of the rings, like Curry's two more rings over Wilt's. But I find myself, I was like, nah, that's probably just not. I shouldn't get lost in the weeds. I should just stick to the point. So I think I did good. I think I'm kind of trying to pick the physical specimen that was Wilt and the production and the things he could do versus Curry's just gravitas outside of the 3-point line in terms of, defenses. One thing, there's sometimes I'll actually be watching a game with my dad, and me and my dad both fancy ourselves as shooters. And we watch someone like Steph Curry, and it honestly is mind-boggling to see the quick release. It's almost like he's not even looking sometimes. And like, it's crazy the way 3-point shooting has evolved in the last 10 or 15 years. It's astounding to look at.
Welcome, YT Hoops. How are you today, sir?
What's up? Good morning. I'm good. How's everybody doing?
Good. Good morning.
Good morning. I thought that was a really good debate. I did go give it to NNB. But it's hard to judge these because, like, obviously I'm trying to be objective, but like, if you had just asked me ahead of the debate, I would have said Wilt, right? And I don't think it's that close, to be honest. Like, I think if you just look at like dominance, I mean, Wilt was like dominated the league to such a level that like people don't take it seriously for 15 years. I I do think a point to T Perfect though is Nick said like I think or NMB, I don't know if he said like, hey, if you shut down that one aspect, he has no other he has nothing else to offer. And like that's true to an extent. But like people will use that argument against Jordan for LeBron. They'll be like, oh, but LeBron is so much better at like a score of passing or rebounding, and like that may or may not be true, but the scoring is the by far the most important part of the game, right? And then Steph is the best at shooting a shot that is by far the most valuable shot of the game. So I think that could have been a good response to NNB. But overall, I thought it was a great discussion, and I think you guys actually both did a great job. Also, that Hakeem at 3 is insane, but sorry, another time.
Yeah, I think that's actually a good way of putting Curry, the most valuable shot the league has ever seen. That probably that's a great way to argue his side. I think it's a good line.
Yeah.
Thanks. So I'll hop off, guys.
Yeah, like and I was
All right,
also
thanks.
gonna say
Thanks, Dan.
the he's right about Wilt's statistical dominance. It's almost such an outlier. You don't take it seriously, and it's in. I can't say I disagree very much because I kind of see Russell's rings. I've kind of made this argument too. It's so astronomical, right? It's like everyone's here, the greats, and then you have this one data point that's just so it's twice, Jordan's, right? Essentially. So like it's just it's almost like hard to put it into your calculation, right? It's almost like it's not fair. So like that's a good point too.
Yeah, I said, like, I kind of mentioned it in the show, and like, so I mean, how I consider the greatest scorers of all time is like you had to lead your team in scoring at least 10 years. You had to be above 50% or at or above 50% over that time period as well. And the 10 players who've done that were Adrian Dantley, Jordan, LeBron, Durant, Shaq, Dr. J, Hakeem, Kareem, Karl Malone, and Wilt. So those guys, I think, are objectively the best scorers of all time. If you look at a degree of longevity, efficiency, and they were the most dominant on their team. Those guys were the best, especially if you're talking about all the things that go into scoring with context. And Will is part of it. Anytime you're talking about someone, like you said, it would be different if he was just shooting 40% and shooting 40 shots a game and clearly a detriment to his team. But he was efficient, especially next closest guy, next closest center was like 50%, or worse during that time period where Wilt was shooting like 53. So he was there, he was combining it, and so that's actually what makes a score so hard to stop is if on 9 in 9 out they're going to be efficient, and there's not a whole lot you can do about it. That's what makes Mike great, and all those other guys I mentioned, is that you're either going to take shots, but if they're making most of them, you have to adjust to stop them. So that's what made Wilt a monster. So
Real fast, we have well, actually, I can't say this because in his title he says I am not a fan. But I was going to say we have Adrian Dantley fan Politicus Rex in here, or appreciator at least. Rex, you should call in. This is a safe space. Nobody's gonna fight.
Is Rex still doing his cycling?
No, last time I talked to him, he said he didn't have time to do it. He's been working a lot.
Okay.
Yeah.
Fair enough. Yeah.
But I guess he can answer for himself unless he dipped out.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's yeah, I mean, but I agree. Like what you said about defense, I was like, I'm not really going to go there and like bash that.
Yeah, you just got to ignore that one. Yeah.
You got to ignore that because like, yeah. I mean, yeah.
Smart. Yeah, just don't even engage. Yeah,
yeah. It's like, nah, smart. Let's just pretend I didn't hear that. It's like 10 blocks a game or so probably is going to trump everything else that I say about that. So.
Yeah, Wilt, man, who knows? Wilt might have averaged like 5 blocks in his career, something crazy like that.
Something silly like that, just like prime, first 4 years of his career, Kareem. But
yeah,
it's a shame. Bill Russell would have been up there too. Would have been insane. They would have averaged triple doubles.
100%. Yeah.
So.
Yeah, they probably would have had a few quadruple doubles if they counted all those stats. Who knows?
Oh, 1,000%. But I can't wait for the Magic Johnson Steve Nash debate, dude. That's gonna be fun.
I saw that one. Yeah, I saw that one posted. That'd be interesting.
Yeah, I mean, it's like I can't wait to see. I think it'll be similar to this one, where it's like, what kind of angle do you go to? Like the team turnaround? I don't know.
You'd have to argue Nash's like half court ability and the pick and roll and his shooting versus, I guess Magic's creation and probably is a better defender too, right? That's an interesting one. However angle you want to take.
Yeah, no, exactly. I don't know how I'd approach it other than maybe like because I mean, I would say Steve Nash went and had a great turnaround in his first year there, but Magic won Finals MVP his rookie year, so it's like,
I ultimately that's kind of the same thing. It's like I think the two-way ability of Magic over Nash, in my opinion, puts him over.
Yeah, I mean, he was just a better player.
Yeah, just saw and athlete, right? 6'9" point guard. Like, all right, fuck.
Yeah, it's like, what are you doing?
Yeah.
So, okay, 6'9", he's insane.
Rex says that in the 108 full games available, Wilt averaged 8.8 blocks.
Holy shit.
I mean, that sounds about right.
God.
Yeah.
I mean, that's just a man among. I mean, that's where I don't ever like to like trash eras or competition because I think it's disingenuous because you play who's in front of you. But it's just like he was so far more of a specimen than 90% of the guys he was playing there.
Yeah. Like imagine if Rudy Gobert was good on offense. Like that's kind of and he ran track, right? Like you have to understand, you have to try and like compare Wilt to something and then understand how he would be different. Like built like Gobert, but twice as strong, could run for 45 minutes and was actually a good offensive scorer, right? It's just, can you imagine if Rudy Gobert was like that? It'd just be stupid. Like it'd be hard to even engage with, like to think about.
Yeah, it's like if we drop 2020 Giannis into 1951.
yeah.
It'd be like, what? Like they closed the league.
Yeah, right. You have to go somewhere else.
Yeah, I'm like, sorry, come back.
That's funny.
There's only one Harlem Globetrotters. No.
Yeah.
Well, Rex with that savage burn. When did Magic become two-way when he got HIV?
Yeah, I was going to mention that Rex is just dropping jokes in the chat.
God, that's an absolute
That's
burn.
so weird.
I mean, not to slander the man, but I always, I don't know, man. I won't get into that. I'm not going to start.
You know what I'm trying to say, but I'm not going to say it.
Let me refrain.
Yeah, I digress.
But yes, gentlemen, I thought it was a great debate. Tune in for the Steve Nash versus Magic Johnson debate. That'll be happening in about 3 hours.
Okay.
I guess I'm just going to honor Rex because he's a OG of the show. He says you guys don't want to hear it, but Wilt and LeBron are very similar. This will be the last thing if you guys want to address this, and then we'll cut the show off.
Okay.
What do you guys think that's a fair comparison?
What does he mean by that? I guess I need more context.
Yeah.
So I've talked with Rex about this about a million times.
Yeah.
So I can more or less speak on it. Is that the statistical accumulation of things, but not necessarily having the wins, and then physically as well, just the freak athleticism. So
I don't know. I mean, I guess in like a general looking in the rear view mirror, looking back at their careers right now, like I maybe could see that, but again, like Wilt's defensive dominance, like and also he only played like 13, 14 years. Is that right? Wilt did. So I see more. I would say Wilt was more of an exploding star than an accumulation of things if he played under 15 years and dominated like that, right? But I mean, I giving him the benefit of the doubt, like I understand what he's saying, like massive statistical output, but just doesn't have the rings to really show for it at the end of the day.
Yeah, I mean, if he means like he says physically here, I mean, I agree.
Yeah,
like
that too.
It's tough because, I mean, I agree. Like it's tough for me to say like, yeah, we've seen because LeBron I think is kind of a different specimen where he's a stretch three where he's bigger than a lot of the small forwards as far as the ones who will run your point, be the focal point of your offense. I mean, I think like someone like McGrady could have been like that, but if he would have bulked up. But LeBron is definitely an outlier as far as just what he's put together, in my opinion, as far as his overall game package and his build. But I mean, comparing him to Wilt is tough because I think Wilt was quick for a big man, um, but I don't see any similarities in their game style or play style, I should say. But
I think Rex is kind of referring to like the story arc
So-
overall of their careers is similar. I would give him that.
sure, yeah, I mean, yeah.
I think I will say this, like LeBron's skill set and his longevity though are definitely pretty incredible. Like, I mean, as much as we rag on the guy, right? Like it's pretty crazy the body of his career, right? The body of work.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Like that's why I have him like, even if like when I'm ignoring your accolades and media awards, like, and I'm looking at statistical and analytical dominance for a sustained period of time, there's no, even if you just use 10 years and none of it, like not year 21, obviously, he's still top 5 for me at least. And it's like, yeah, to see like it's, even if you're just sitting back and like you're like, wow, longevity is, I think totals I don't think are a great argument for ranking a player, but when you're looking at someone putting up great top 10 numbers in their league at that age, I do think it's incredible. Obviously you hear that every day on ESPN, things like that, but I think it's still a great achievement to like kind of see that consistency.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah,
without slowing down. I mean, he's not my GOAT, but it's still, like you said, it's a great achievement.
Yeah, so I struggled really bad with trying to put LeBron in the top 10 or not. I think ultimately it just came to that two-way ability. I felt like there were some other guys who two-way were just a lot better defensively. I have a top 11 that I call my top 10, and I put LeBron at 11. He should be in the top 10, right? But whenever I was thinking about it again, I kind of broke it down to like skill set and dominance, and LeBron's been like very good for a very long time, but he just the statistical dominance just quite isn't there like people I think like to think in terms of like a year-to-year basis, right? He's only twice ever led the league in anything, but yeah, like he's been top 10 his whole career, right? Like that's really hard to do.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And like I agree with you. I don't think he was ever really just the best ever and everything, but if you look at, to me, like it's like I look at their peak and prime, like he was voted top 5 in DPOY 4 different times. He led the league
One year I think he actually got the most votes or tied, but he didn't
he
win
should
it.
have won it in 2012, I think, because he did lead the league in defensive blocks plus minus. And I think he was by far one of the more impactful. But I mean, I mean, even if he did win it, his level of defensive prowess for that 5 years, like from 08 to 13, I think combined with his with his offensive prowess, the two-way player right there, I don't think was any less than top 5 all time as far as two-way prime.
Yeah.
But I get it though. Like for the last like 10 years or so, definitely hasn't been to that same level that someone like a Duncan or Hakeem was for sure. But I just think that especially if you're looking at the overall dominance analytically and where he ranks now, for me, it's tough to put him outside like the top 10 or even top 7. That's where I think I want to put Jokic if he improves defensively. But yeah, to me, it's weird. But I can definitely, when people want to put others above him, like usually the names that come up, I really don't have a problem with.
Yeah, and like, see, that was the one thing I had to do too. Was like I had to remove the legacy and impact aspect, kind of off the court stuff. That's what I was saying. Like, if you want to talk about how Curry changed the game, plus the Warriors dynasty, yeah, like I could see him being in the top 10 based on all of that, right? I think for me, I was looking just more of like the player, like what can the player, if I was a coach taking players off a big board, who would I draft, right? Like in terms of what they're going to give me.
70s Hakeem or 70s Kareem, first overall.
Yeah, so I have Kareem third, I think, in mind. So yeah.
No, I was going to say thank you for Travis for admitting that Bob Cousy and George Mikan should be in the top 10.
That's all I heard. That's all I heard.
Yeah,
that's what I got out of that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think first overall, I'm taking just even in hindsight, I'm taking either, and I get to pick the year they start. I'm picking like either 90s Hakeem or 70s Kareem just to start a team, build around. I mean, if we're talking from the two-way perspective, and I get that degree of longevity. So,
I've always said whenever you take in like salaries and contracts into it, I think Hakeem might be the best player to pick first, right? If you look at like all he could do and contribute, right? Maybe, you know, Jordan's prowess at a couple of things I think puts him over the edge in terms of like a player.
yeah.
But in terms of building a team, I think Hakeem might have, you know, like a top 3 argument, right? In terms of
Yeah.
everything he
Because
could
you
do.
know you're going to get the best two-way player ever, arguably, for a number
Yeah,
of
at least
years.
for a couple of years there. Oh my
Yeah.
God, yeah.
And he's
his-
durable. Yeah. And he literally elevates teams.
yeah.
It's tough. Like, nothing against Jordan. I think he's the GOAT, but like, it's just so tough to build. You have to get the perfect pieces around him to go on that kind of a run.
Yeah, Jordan's
Like,
more of like a takeover, and
Yeah.
Hakeem's more of like a, you know, I'm very
Yeah.
good at a lot of things, right?
Yeah,
Like,
he was like Bill Russell in terms like he was winning games defensively a lot of times,
yeah,
and you know he was still gonna give you that, especially in the playoffs, like the 30 points per game on 58%, whatever. But yeah, it's like they're perfect players to start your team around. There's really no wrong answer, but yeah, you're right. Hakeem is probably top 3.
and he started playing like in 9th or 10th grade. That's just,
Yeah.
Dude, it's just ridiculous. I think
Yeah.
he started playing when he was like 15 or something.
Just outliers. I'm curious to see if Wemby stays healthy and he's like maybe bulks up a bit. He could be in that conversation maybe in 10, 12 years, but we'll see.
He's way better defensively than I thought, or what I knew he was going to be coming in. He seems to be way better at that than I was giving him credit for.
He was robbed of DPOY this year, in my opinion.
Really?
Yeah.
Let's remember my take that the Spurs are going to be a playoff team this year. Because of
I meant to do a review on my Western Conference predictions that we did, Dart, and I was pretty close, minus 1 or 2 teams. I was pretty spot on. I had OKC at number 2. Minnesota and the Clippers are the 2 teams I missed though.
I thought the Clippers would take care of Dallas, honestly. But
I thought if Kawhi was not going to play, 30 plus minutes a game, I thought the Mavericks had enough power to get over.
who do you got in the finals?
Oh, I got Mavs, dude. I think since the trade deadline where they got PJ and Gafford and all that, it's just they are a totally different team. Like defensively, they are just it is now Kyrie and Luka, and then you just filled the rest of the 3 spots with dogs. Like
Those
that's
are
what
obviously some of the better pickups
feels
I've
like.
ever seen.
Do what?
Yeah, so some of the better pickups I've ever seen in Gafford and Jones and Lively.
Yeah,
like,
Jones for the minimum,
Yeah.
man. Like, what is going on? Yeah,
steals.
absolutely.
So Rex,
we have Matt in here.
Matt.
I don't know who this is.
Meh.
How you doing, Rex?
Hey, what's up? No, I really didn't want to call in because I didn't want to sort of hijack the debate or anything. I was loving listening to the back and forth of the debate, so I just made a couple general statements in the chat and was just going to stick with that.
I tailored my entire argument to like not upset you, Rex. Like that was my goal.
Well, the only issue I have is that it's so much of Wilt's career at this point is myth, hearsay, conjecture, and just broad generalization. And that's the big issue, is what most people think of Wilt is not actually what Wilt was. It's what he's remembered as. And those are 2 different things. It's the argument that I had against you with the Mike and versus LeBron, who's greater. And when you're talking about legacy, LeBron doesn't have a legacy because he's present tense. He's today. Legacy is how you're remembered. So he loses because Mikan is almost all legacy, right? It's almost all legacy. You can't really look at his numbers and compare. You can only go by the legacy, whereas with LeBron, there is no legacy yet. Well, it's the same with this. It's same with this. There really is no legacy yet with Steph. Now, there's obvious conjecture. We know his image his present image and the things he's done. But how people will look at him in 20 years, we don't know, because that's not us. That's our kids. That's the next generation. They will decide that. Same with LeBron. Whereas Wilt was so far long ago, people are talking about the things that you bring up most are the 50 points a game, how many women he slept with,
20,000.
and you know, those are primarily the two biggest things you bring up, and his insane athleticism. Those are the three things that people need. His strength really is what most of the talk I hear is about. Oh, he could bench press 500 pounds, 600 pounds. He picked up Arnold Schwarzenegger. He did this, he did that. It's not about his game. People don't talk about his game. People don't even know. And that's the biggest issue with these comparisons. They're so far apart that giving proper weight to each side is so difficult. I mean, the only way I would put it, I don't like comparing and ranking players specifically. All y'all know that. But I always put it like this. You show up at your favorite playground, right? You've got you and three of your buddies show up. You've got four. You got next game. You got to pick up a fifth, you know? And every great player throughout history is sitting there waiting to be picked. I'm picking 25-year-old Wilt Chamberlain over anybody.
Yeah.
Anyone
That's kind
ever.
of how I saw it too. Or how I was thinking about it.
Because you can talk about, well, this guy can do this shot, and this guy can do that shot, and this guy can do. Okay, well, you know what? What Wilt could do is grab every stinking rebound.
Yeah.
And if he's got the ball, that means your guy doesn't.
It's true. Yeah, I mean, there's no
Rebounds
way I'm
and
picking Curry
championships.
over Wilt if I need a fifth. Hell no.
Do what?
I mean, there's no way I'm picking Curry over Wilt if I need a fifth.
Well, that's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
That's what I'm saying. But that's how I make every decision. That's how I make every pick. Is say, okay, I got one spot. I'm picking my team, and I got a choice of anyone ever. I'm picking Wilt.
Yeah,
just because he's going to scare the crap out of everybody on the other team, and he's going to grab every rebound. So that makes our chances of winning that much higher. One thing, and it's just the era. It's so hard to debate this. I literally have this 51-49 for Nick. Literally 51-49. Curry, we believe we know what his impact long-term will be. But let's be honest. Since this revolution, this three-point revolution led by Curry, does anyone disagree with that? He led it. He is the guy that has led this change, this monumental shift in how the entire sport is played. But isn't he the only one that's won a championship doing it?
And having Klay Thompson, the other great shooter of our time.
But what other team without Steph Curry has won doing this whole three-point attack?
Well, and this is something that I've brought up too before, is that especially with the Timberwolves, it's obviously not the same as before. They shoot a lot more three-pointers, but I think there's I think there's evidence to this case already, is that I think the game is going to transition more to having more prolific and talented big men highlight the face of the league, and that's already the case. I mean, what is it? I forget what this is. I think the last 6 MVPs were centers or something along the lines of that, if you include Giannis as a center. But big men in general, I mean, I think they're taking the league back. So to your point, Rex, I think that there's a very good possibility that we'll see a downtick in three-pointers in the future because people aren't being as successful with it.
Well, here's the problem. The problem is it's professional basketball. That changes everything, okay? Because it's no longer about winning. It is about making money. right? It's about making money. Curry's style of play gets clicks, makes money, right? Brings in fans, increases popularity. Wilt's way of playing changed the game on the court, how the players saw the game. Same way Russell did. It changed when Magic and Bird came in at the same time. 2 6'9" players that played completely differently, yet so alike at the exact same time. It changed the game from a player standpoint, how the players looked at the game. Curry has changed the game, how the fans look at the game, how the average non-talented guy on the playground plays. Like Nick said, you can't be like Wilt, but so many casual fans and so many quote-unquote basketball players that just play. They just play for fun. They've never played anywhere, never had any success at it, but they love the game. They just play basketball. They are Curry people. They're Curry fans because they can do what Curry did. Not as to the level, obviously, but they can play that style. They can't do what Wilt did, like Nick said. But here's the thing. That's for fans. You get every big man in the NBA, he's trying to be Wilt. Every big man in the NBA, the guys on the bench, any 7-footer, any guy that's on a contract that's 6'10" or above, wants to average 50 and 25. He wants to do that. They want to be Wilt. That's the reality of it. Wilt is for the players. Curry is for the fans. The fans give you the money.
I wanted to add something, Nick, that Rex had brought this up too. You should have mentioned this, is that Wilt had the best pull-out game of all time as well. No, but
we assume. Could have been sterile.
Yeah, that we know of.
What a blessing. Huh? Jesus.
yeah.
But but some things like the one thing that I put on Wilt's side, and I've mentioned this in the past, he's one of only 2 all-time sporting greats in the history of American sports that halfway through a Hall of Fame caliber career completely changed how they played the game, how they had always played the game, and then played totally different and was just as good and even more successful. Only him and Babe Ruth. No one else ever.
Yeah.
Babe Ruth was headed for a Hall of Fame pitching career. He was the best left-hander in the major leagues and won 2 World Series as a pitcher for the Red Sox. Then goes to the Yankees, and he's what we know, the home run hitter. Will could have kept scoring. He only scored for 7 years and then stopped. He could have kept playing that way, and LeBron would still be chasing him. But he changed. And midstream, on a whim, on a dare, actually, with his head coach, completely changed how he played and ended up winning his championships after he changed. No one else has done that in all of American sports. Him and Babe Ruth, the only 2. So that is something that really goes towards Wilt, because you can't look at Wilt and say, well, Wilt couldn't. He couldn't have done this. Oh, he couldn't have done that. He couldn't have played in this era. He couldn't have played in that era. No one had changed the way he did. He showed he could play any way, in any era, any style. He proved it at the highest level. So that's something that you have to take into consideration. Like Nick said, you take away Curry's shot, and I always make this argument. You take away his shot, he's not in the NBA. You take away Wilt's shooting, okay, well, without Wilt shooting, he won 2 championships and a finals MVP.
And 11
without shooting.
titles.
Yeah, I mean, it's just a totally, it's the thing, it's what Red Auerbach said. A great big man beats a great little man every time because the basket's 10 feet high. Home plate is on the ground. A soccer goal sits on the ground. The end zone in football is on the ground. Basketball, it's 10 feet high. The closer you are to that basket, the bigger your advantage is. That's just physics. That's just natural, just common sense.
Yeah, that's also why I kind of brought up even just the fact he's 7'3", ran track, and he played 45 minutes a game, right? Like that alone on a basketball floor it's everything, right? It's that
but
alone.
He wouldn't play that much today. Yeah, he wouldn't play that much today. Back then, Wilt had his contract was he got paid. The highest he got paid was $100,000, or not the highest, but he famously got the $100,000 a year contract. And then it was on the front page of the paper. Bill Russell walked into the Celtics front office and said, "What are you going to do about it?" So they paid him $1 more. But back then, your star players got part of the gate. So they were on the court all the time because that's what kept the fans there.
Mm.
And it's not just paying your ticket and getting in. If you're watching the game's a blowout and you leave halfway through the third quarter, concession stands lose money. They need you there through the entire game for the concession stand to make money. For the merch to make money, you have to stay in your seat. You have to stay there for 2.5 to 3 hours, because at that point you're going to get hungry. You've got to hit the snack bar. Okay, that's how all those people make money. You just show up for 5 innings and leave. They don't make money. You just leave after the third quarter. They don't make money. This is the financial reality of the sport.
Yep.
Okay, at the time. Now they protect their investment. Okay, if someone gets hurt, they sit. Period. Because they're making $40 million a year, and we are not risking something stupid happening to you and losing that investment and that money-making ability.
That's, I think, a huge detriment to the game today is like when you see people deliberately do. That's kind of why I'm glad they partially are combating that with like the 65 game requirement now to like win any of the major awards, because it's getting to the point where it's just you're just sitting just sit because you think you might, this game's not important or you might get injured.
Yeah.
So.
But you're going to end up, it's going to hurt on the back end. You're not going to have all these guys playing 20 years like you have been.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Jordan, Bird's a little bit different. I'll leave him out. You all know the Bird story. Magic, he's a little bit different too.
The guy's not as great as Bob Cousy.
Yeah. Well, Cousy, all of these players before the load management era, they all basically played 13 years worth of games before their bodies started breaking down. Every era, all the way across the board. When you play full schedule, loaded minutes, your body lasts roughly 13 to 15 seasons and you're done. That's the way it was for 40 years. Load management comes in, you start having guys playing 20. Lots of guys playing 20. You didn't have that back then because your body could not take it. The shoes were garbage. The floors were garbage. The traffic, the travel was garbage. The food was garbage. Yeah. So they didn't last as long. That was just how it was. And that's across all of society. It wasn't uncommon for, a lot of guys, a lot of dads to die in their 60s. Just 30, 40 years ago, that was, no one was surprised by it. Now, someone dies at my age, 56, and it's like, oh, they died so young. It's like 56 was a long time for back in the 50s and 60s and all that. If you had a hard life, if you worked, playing professional sports was hard work back then. You didn't have the nutrition. You didn't have the doctors, the multi-million-dollar budgets for the medical staff. You didn't have all that. And that's why they played less.
Mm-hmm.
And, these are things like Curry's ankles. If he had played back in the 70s, he would have been in the league 7-8 years and gone, just because the medical experience, the medical available was not what it is now. What ended Wilt's career now is an outpatient surgery. Okay? These things need to be taken, and you need to understand these things when you're comparing players that are 50 years apart.
Mm-hmm.
It's just, that's why I said my first comment was, this is just this is such a hard debate that you really can't even have a debate. You can have which you guys had. You had a civil discussion about it. It wasn't a stringent, hardcore debate, because I don't think you really can with something this diverse.
Yeah,
really, this is.
I'll just say real quick, my biggest piece of advice to people if they like to debate or this kind of stuff is that you should go in expecting to not change anyone's mind. Like, just go in to make your points and say what you want to say. Do not expect anyone to change where they were after you talk for 5 minutes and they go, oh, well, now that you talked for 5 minutes, I've totally changed my opinion. Don't think that's going to happen, right? Just go in for fun and you're just here to say your piece, and then whatever happens after that is whatever happens,
Yeah, the worst thing you can possibly do is go into a debate where, especially like you said, it's like things or people's opinions are going to be set in stone for the most part, especially when it comes to players, narrative, things like that. All you can do is go in there. You can't be confrontational. Just be like, you know what? Here's some facts. Here's my perspective, and then, like you said, just kind of say your piece and get out of there. So.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's why I specifically did not want to take part in this, because it's not really my thing. People just, most people don't want to listen to me. All I can do is when you're talking about the modern game and what's going on right now with the Mavs and the Celtics going to the finals and all, I don't know. I'm not watching. I have no clue. I can't name 3 guys off either roster. I don't care. So I got nothing to add.
Rex, we should. I keep trying to convince you, but we should keep doing your Learn the Game podcast sometime whenever you're ready.
Yeah, right now we're having some medical issues throughout the family that we're weekly doctor visits and tests and all that type of stuff. So I really can't set any schedule.
No, I got you. I understand. I hope that all gets better, man.
Yeah.
But yeah, all I'm here to do is just to try to explain to the younger generation that did not have the opportunity to experience these older guys exactly what they were, not what their legacy has made them.
Yeah, that's what I was saying about Mikan is when I was making my list, I just put him as the grandfather off to the side, and I didn't even rank him because it's just so hard to try and put him somewhere. Like, he obviously is the father, right? He is the godfather, right? So he obviously has a very special place on the mantle. But in terms of when I was trying to rank him, I just couldn't. I had no idea where to put him in. You know what I mean?
He's top 40 probably.
Well, that's the whole thing. How do you rank
LeBron? No.
Yeah. How do you rank? How do you rank them? Because really, in a lot of ways, you take a guy with Mikan's skill set today, and he's a solid all-star level player because he could do 3 things. He could score with either hand. He could score with either hand, which how many guys today do that?
No one.
Still today, 70 years later, he could score with either hand. He was ambidextrous. Okay. He could bang. Right? He played very physical. He played gorilla ball. All right. He was that guy. Yeah. And he led the league in rebounding repeatedly. He could get the ball. He could get you possessions. Those guys never lose value.
That's
He
one
would
thing
throw down with you. He would swing the elbows with you. He would get the ball, and he can score inside of 10 feet with either hand. That's valuable today as it ever was.
That's one thing
Those guys fill out every single roster.
That's one thing I actually got a little bit more appreciation for when I did that debate with Dart, was that, like, doing a lot of research. Like, when I first started, like, watching basketball, like, I think of, like, a lot of people had certain biases against different eras, just maybe because of, ignorance, or, like, the newer thing is always the better thing. But I think it's like the only thing you can do when you're fairly ranking players is, like, yeah, you play what's in front of you, because it's not like the argument is better, but it's like, no one player from any era had an advantage over those guys, as far as they didn't have better equipment, they didn't have food or access to supplements these guys didn't have, things like that, like skill sets from the future or anything like that. They were on the even playing field, and they dominated, and so that's all you can really look at. And other than that, it's just like a what if. And so that's why I think, yeah, like players like Mike and Russell, well, obviously, they can. That's what allows them to be in the discussion, because it's, like I said, they dominated what they're expected to, and everybody doesn't really have an advantage over everyone else. That's why when players talk about, oh, it's more skilled today, sure, but you have access to the same skills or equipment, food, whatever you're using to say that. It's always an even playing field with whoever's in the league.
Yeah. But that's the thing, when people talk about how much the game has changed. The game, basketball, has not changed. Okay? Rules have been changed to affect games. The game itself has not changed. The most basic ingredients to the game. The average player today is the same size as the average player 50 years ago. At every position. When you talk the free throw percentages of today. Now, that's defense has no play in this. You can't say, well, defensive rules affected this, affected scoring, affected this. This is a free throw. It's a man standing at the line, staring at the basket. They're basically the same as they've always been the last 40, 50 years. You're talking like 2 percentage points, like 77% to 75. That's it. That's just right there. When you talk about skills increasing, only 2. Ball handling and shooting from distance are the only things that have improved. That's it. When was the last time you saw somebody grab 18 rebounds in a game off boxing out?
I'd have to look.
You show me that game in the last 20 years, I'll give you $10,000, because it does not exist. Because that skill has been completely legislated out of the game. There is no such foul as over the back anymore.
Rex, I'm going to find that game.
I was thinking the same
Because
thing.
I've already looked.
Challenge accepted.
I've already looked. It's not there. That's why I said that number. Because I've already looked.
5 hours. Thanks.
Yeah. But, that's the rules have been changed by NBA. The game in and of itself has not changed. Like Oscar Robertson said, you shoot the ball, you dribble the ball, you rebound the ball. That's it. Basketball is basketball. You take any great player from any era, put them in another era, they're going to be great. Great players play great. That's what they do.
Reminds me of my favorite scene in Hoosiers, when they go to the finals and Gene Hackman measures out and he's like, it's still a 10-foot goal. Like nothing's changed. Yeah. The arena, the crowd, it's still a 50 by 94 court and a 10-foot high goal.
Yep. They measure the free throw line 15 feet. Yeah. He measures to the rim 10 feet. He says, I think, as he's reeling in the tape, he says, I think you'll find, gentlemen, that these are the exact same measurements as your court back in Hickory.
Yeah.
Yeah. And if the ball handling is so much better today, and I said ball handling, I meant dribbling. If the ball handling is so much better today, how come the guy that has the all-time record for turnovers is playing today?
Well, he played a long time, I guess, and he had the ball a lot in his hands. So,
yeah.
The pass first player.
But it's still
LeBron James.
But it's just the thing that there is such, because they found out, David Stern found out that perception is reality. Whatever we push as being the best, the vast majority of fans that pay their money will believe is the best. So it was always with him. They had a sports writers poll in 1980 where they asked who's the greatest basketball player of all time. Bill Russell won overwhelmingly, because he won. Because that was, to that generation of sports writers, these were the guys that were in their 40s, 50s, and 60s at that time. They either fought in World War II in Korea, or their older brothers and fathers fought. They were the generation that you win. Winning is what matters.
We were kind of talking about this a second ago, how like Wilt's statistical dominance and Bill Russell's rings are such an outlier that you almost dismiss them, right? And it's almost that Russell winning 11 rings, right? Coming up after that, you just said there's no way anyone, the best player on a team, right, is going to win 11 rings again like that, right? So I was almost that, not so much that winning wasn't important anymore, but we simply will just never get to that number. Like, it's kind of just silly, how much he won and how much he led his team to rings. It's like the next generation, they were just like, well, I guess we'll focus on stats and other stuff because we're never going to get to 11 rings. It just almost seems impossible.
Yeah, but the problem was the guy that was racking up all the stats was playing at the same time.
Yeah.
And it was just
Yeah. I mean, that was like, I mean, you'll never have that again because of like things like free agency, things of that nature, like players wanting to get bigger bags. Like back then, like they were happy with the salary and they wanted to win more than anything. And because that was legacy building.
I sent the clip to Dart, I believe. And I can't even remember who was in the clip I sent to him. That's his age. But
I think it was Kuzi shooting. You're talking about the Kuzi shooting the 3-pointers?
No, about the one talking about the difference in the playing. Today, players practice. Mm-hmm. So they're great shooters. They can do all the dribbling drills and all that. But then they get into a game and they're no more effective because they don't practice. These days, they'll play 6, if on an AAU team, they'll play 6 games a day, but they'll practice one night a week. Where back in the old days, you practiced as a team over and over and over again, and then you'd go out and show what you had practiced on the court for one game. And so the emphasis wasn't on, like, you can sit here and you can dribble like Kyrie all you want. That Magic Johnson snap pass over the defender's head is still the most efficient way to get the ball from point A to point B. And it doesn't matter how fast you are or how great your handles are, you cannot beat a pinpoint pass.
I'm actually the best passer in playground history. So
Angry old Hoops always says he's the GOAT because he's accumulated the most points at his YMCA.
Yeah.
Over 40 years or however long he's been there.
It'd be so funny to hang a banner at the Y.
Just make it yourself, put it on there.
Yeah.
Well, gentlemen, this was great. Before we get going, I forgot to mention this. I just wanted to say, if you want to think about this later, take a moment of silence for the Roosters. They won't be back. I have been homed. But all the Roosters, they'll be gone.
No.
Maybe. Yeah. So, but past that, thank you all. I thought it was a great debate. Thank you, Rex, for coming back and gracing us with your knowledge here. And I hope the medical issues with your family get better in the near term. But it was great hearing a lot of the perspectives you bring, as always. Do y'all have any last words for everybody? Travis?
No, man. Hey, great debate, Nick. Always a pleasure to watch you in action, and
Enjoyed it.
yeah, enjoyed it. Looking forward to the one coming up here as a spectator. So,
Absolutely.
Well, I cannot wait for the Mavericks to win the championship, to watch Nick's 90-minute live video of their 23-24 season, which I know is probably already rough cut in his computer.
In the works, yeah. And I'll make a video, I think Sunday or Monday, going back over the season and previewing the finals. So I'll make that video.
Yeah.
look at that.
Yeah.
Okay, no. All right. Here's the debate for Nick. Here's the debate. This is if the Mavericks win, I want a comparison. 2011 with Dirk to this year with Doncic. Which team was better?
That's fair enough. We can do that if they win.
I didn't watch either, so I don't know.
This team would obliterate them.
But all right, all. Thanks again for coming, and and Nick, we got to see more videos from you. I know you've been busy lately, but
yeah,
I miss watching some of your videos, man. I know you.
I gotta get back on the horse, yeah, for sure.
But thanks everyone. Thank you, live chat. And we had A Sturdy said he found the game, Rex.
It's funny he didn't mention the game, the player, or the date, though.
Yeah. But thank you, everybody. Samuel Dumas, Edmund, Dale, YT Hoops, who had called in earlier. Dan, thank you. Amongst everyone else in the live chat. And check out the debate that will be happening in about another 2 hours. Steve Nash versus Magic Johnson. Who's greater?
I can't wait for them.
It's going to be.
I want to know what you were smoking when you made up that debate.
I didn't. So some people, just to clarify. So what I've done is I take the list that people have provided for me, and I try to match up. Number 7 was the one that we used for this one. So I tried to match up the number 7 versus number 7. And if you had somebody, if you were arguing for something that didn't make sense, so if your number 7 was Bill Russell, or their number 7 was Bill Russell, but your number 2 was Bill Russell, and you were having somebody else debate, you would not debate that. You would go up or down the line to find a match where you actually have some conviction for it instead of just arguing for something. So this guy,
somebody had Michael Jordan as number 7. And versus
no, that was the only one that I made an exception for. Because
okay.
I know Lance personally, and he's made this argument that Rudy Fernandez has been the GOAT forever. So that's the only reason I did that, and it would be the only time ever in history that anybody would ever argue.
Who is this Lance guy? I looked at his list, and I literally had to take a screenshot, and I sent it to my friends, and I was like, "What is going on?"
Rudy Fernandez's mother doesn't think he's the GOAT, okay?
Very bold list, I must say.
yeah, very.
I love seeing Rasheed Wallace, though. I saw Rasheed, and I was like, you know what? I'll let that one pass.
He's a top 3 player, didn't you know, dude?
Oh, yeah. Wait. Can I say something real quick?
Yeah.
Can I mention something from I was on a video where Rasheed was trashing Bill Walton.
Of course.
Mm-hmm.
And somebody in the comment section was basically calling like Bill Walton a scrub, and he was never at Rasheed's level. And I just had to get in there. I'm sorry. I just had to go in there. Is there anyone who seriously believes Rasheed Wallace was better than a healthy Bill Walton?
Lance?
Not me.
Outside of Lance, I don't know.
Okay. I was just wondering, it's that whole legacy thing, people just knowing, younger people only know him as a commentator running his mouth, and he doesn't have all the highlights. because he wasn't
Walton
that
was a
kind of
top-
player.
But Walton was a top 20 center of all time. Like,
Well, the way I just put it is the man that coached Bill Walton, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, and Sven Nader. All three were MVPs in the pros, rebounding leaders in the pros. The man that coached Kareem Abdul-Jabbar in college said Bill Walton is the perfect basketball player.
I mean,
He's the Bill Walton of basketball players.
He was
Bill
I was
Walton.
gonna
Definitely a
say
player.
the way people feel about Derrick Rose these days is kind of how people felt about Bill back in the day, right? Maybe even
Yeah.
more so,
Mhm.
considering his college
Yeah.
dominance as well, right? Like he had proved it, I think, even to a more of a degree than Rose had.
That's such a
But,
good comparison.
Yeah, I think.
Yeah, I mean, he was the greatest player in high school. He was the greatest player in college when he was there.
Yeah.
And then, what people forget, he refused to play for the Olympic team in '72. And look what happened.
Yeah, the miracle.
He was supposed to be the team was built around him. And then with his political, beliefs, he refused to play. And I read an interview with the Russian coach or Soviet coach who said his entire team in the build-up to the Olympics knew they were playing for second place because all of his players were huge fans of Bill Walton. And it was, if Walton plays, we're getting silver. That's that. We're not winning. Then when they found out Bill Walton was not on the team, it was then they realized that they could beat America.
Yeah.
And then some help from the officials.
Yeah, and then a little bit of help at the finish line.
Little bit of help. Yeah, a little bit of help. Replay the final play 3 times till they get a score. Then call it.
Yeah.
All right, gentlemen. Thank you, everybody. And thank you, Chad, again. And for everyone, Michael Jordan fans are the best.